Hello, all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week, brought to you by Gestalt IT. I'm your host for the week, Rich Straffolino, editor with Gestalt IT. Joining me to my left on the screen, sure, I know how directions work, is the one, the only, coming from the great state of South Carolina, not like that. North Carolina. Boo. We have NetApp's a guru of analyst relations, Tim Waldron. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Rich. As I say in radio, long-time listener, first-time caller. I guess in this case, long-time watcher, first-time contributor.
Yes, you're the official fan of the show, so thank you for that, Tim. We're going to get busting in right here with the story that's, kind of analogous. We have a security field day actually going on a little bit later today and throughout the rest of this week over at the Tech Field Day side of the biz. So we thought I'd start out with a little security story, and we got some follow-ups from the Marriott and Starwood reservation system hack from last week. We have new information from the Washington Post and the New York Times. They're both reporting that, according to sources briefed by investigators, the U.S. government believes that Chinese state hackers are responsible for the Starwood reservation system hack that exposed information on up to 500 million people. The hack seems to be affiliated with the Chinese Ministry of State Security as part of an effort to build up an already massive data set on U.S. citizens. It's believed that passport data was fairly unique to the Starwood hack. Basically, that's not something that Google is going to have sitting in any of their databases, and could be used for tracking diplomats, spies, journalists, basically anyone whose location or travel internationally would be a little sensitive. I guess the silver lining here is we won't be seeing this on the dark web, but this is still like horrible, right, Tim?
Yeah, no, it certainly is. I think it's also about looking at the patterns. Usually when you stay in one Marriott hotel or SPG hotel, you're going to stay in others, and tracking the patterns of these folks. It was interesting on Vice News last night. They were talking about the social scoring that they're doing over in China as well. And I think it's probably not unlike what we're probably doing as the U.S. To other places. And I think things are a little different here. We have Nextdoor.com, for example. I'm not sure you're aware of that site, but essentially what it comes down to is my neighbors tattletaling on each other who's not picking up after their dog. But to get back to the hack, my suspicion is it's the SPG moving together with Marriott. Usually when you're migrating platforms or combining things together, that's where security kind of goes awry. So it's really in the transport where these things happen. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that was the source.
Yeah, and combined with some other notable hacks, there has been some other government database hacks over the last 2-3 years, and so kind of aligning some of the information with that, with the stuff you're getting from Marriott, where that's just such a huge, just big giant honeypot to get at, could really be interesting. And it's interesting that you bring up, I know, I think it was Shanghai just announced that they're going to be rolling out, kind of that social credit system ahead of a national launch in China. I believe is planned for 2020 or somewhere around there. It'd be interesting if kind of the backend that they're using for that, basically, which involves, tracking transactions, tracking location, that kind of stuff. Those same kind of systems could very easily be applied to the information that they're getting from this hack, and just used, with even less knowledge by the people involved. I did get my official apology email from Marriott or the Starwood system or whatnot. So I do feel much better that they feel very bad, very, very seriously. So
I didn't get one of those.
The last time we ever see a big, giant, horrible hack like this.
Yeah, I didn't get one of those. Maybe it's because I wasn't hacked, perhaps.
Yeah, well, maybe. Or maybe that was intercepted by China as well. Speaking of frosty U.S.-China relation news, let's get up to speed with the saga of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. She was originally arrested while changing planes in Canada on, I believe, on the 2nd, or I'm sorry, December 1st, with sources telling the Globe and Mail that the United States is alleging that Miss Meng tried to evade the American embargo against Iran, but provided no further details. Now, a Canadian judge has granted her bail set at 10 million Canadian, including $3 million that's being held liable by close associates in the country. Basically, if she flees, these people have to, take that money that's in escrow and pay the Canadian government. So, hopefully she'll stay put. She's also being required to wear an ankle monitor and be accompanied by security guards at all times. So, there's been a lot of news about Huawei and the U.S. government. Basically, the U.S. Again, to kind of reiterate this, is one of the only countries in the world that doesn't use Huawei for a lot of their telecommunications infrastructure. The U.S. has been very set on this and has been trying to really spread the gospel of, hey, don't use Huawei if you're caring about security, especially to allies. We had a story, I think, a couple of weeks ago that U.S. allies are actually, or I'm sorry, that the U.S. is actually briefing allies and proposing subsidies for infrastructure investment for 5G to not use Huawei, to use Nokia or some other solution that's out there. So my theory on this is that this is kind of a 3D chess piece in all of this, Tim. Let me lay this out for you. You tell me if I'm crazy. The U.S. just, they're going to go out and they're going to say, hey, we'll pay for 50% of your infrastructure. We'll make it cost competitive for you to use another solution if Huawei is the cheapest, to use another competitor for your 5G rollout. But, it's still complicated. They already have pre-existing very good relationships with Huawei, a lot of allied countries, Germany, Japan, that kind of stuff. So what the U.S. is going to do is like, hey, we can't make you not buy this equipment, but we are going to make Huawei so toxic internationally. I'm sure they put a ton of pressure on the Canadian government to make this arrest, to make this happen. And basically their plan going forward is just to muddy the waters, to make Huawei such a headache to deal with on an international scale, to try and dissuade people that way as part of, this larger campaign to kind of prevent them getting, a 5G rollout dominance. Crazy?
No, I don't think crazy at all. I was listening to a Vox podcast. That's Vox with a V, and they were talking about, it's not that we're coming close to a Cold War with China. We are in fact in one, and this really is, among a lot of other things that are happening, are ways to kind of cripple that economy. And these are the strings that can be pulled. I think the other lesson in this, it really comes down to partners and supply chain, because the real issue was Skycom Tech, right? And what she was doing was tricking the financial institutions, and I think even Western institutions, to help with the transactions that violated the sanctions against Iran. I mean, that's the technicality of it. But there probably is still something going on there too. So I think it's both things. I think it is your idea of trying to put down. I mean, that's been the case for the last 10 years, at least with Huawei, and then also the actual legal side of it too.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I'm a student of history, and I was recently reading about some of the espionage that went on during World War I, and this in a weird way reminds me of what the British ended up doing against the Germans, which was, when the war started, they severed all of their international telegraph lines that were running across the Atlantic. However, they were still able to use the American one for diplomatic channels. The problem was that the Brits tapped that. And had already broken all of the German codes. And so we're basically able to read all of their telegraphs, where we get the Zimmerman telegraph and all that kind of stuff. If you're into the history of that. And I think, that's a very basic example. That's like almost a very steampunk, kind of example of hacking, back in the day. But that's the fear, I guess, with the US, with Huawei already having basically a lot of infrastructure dominance in a lot of allied countries. And then now rolling out 5G deployment, is that, there may be all of these backdoors that are built into their infrastructure that the Chinese could exploit. And, we'll be hitting on the importance of encryption backdoors in a later story. But first, I think we need to move on to a little financial news, a little less doom and gloom, less cold war-y, certainly. Hey, Dell's going public again. Dell will return to being a publicly traded company on December 28th after agreeing to buy back the VMware trading stock from the EMC acquisition. 61% of shareholders voted for the deal, which will buy back at $120 a share for a total of $23.9 billion, billion with a B. It'll trade under the New York Stock Exchange with the Dell symbol, so I guess not all that surprising. For context, the company went private in 2013 with a $24.4 billion buyback. Is this a vote of confidence now that Dell is can kind of stand the public scrutiny that comes with being a publicly traded company? Or, Tim, is this just trying to get Carl Icahn to shut up?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. I mean, first of all, lucky for our VMware friends out there that that stock will remain separate, and I think that is important that it will operate. I think it helps it run as a startup, not as a conglomerate. So that's helpful for VMware. I think I think part of it is Carl Icahn off his back, but you're always going to have a board to deal with. Whether it's in the private stage. I think it was clear, and I think it was a smart move that Dell, you needed to take a company private so you can then work through a lot of the short-term issues. And he's done a lot of fixing in trying to merge those two very large companies together. And I think it's ready for that next chapter in being public.
Yeah, and yeah, this really, in a lot of ways, is kind of the coda at the end of the Dell EMC acquisition. In a lot of ways, it's saying like, okay, we'll open up the books, everybody can see, our balance sheets and that kind of stuff. And they always had a little bit of visibility because of like the weird VMware relationship, which I completely agree with you is super smart for them. I think it motivates that division, to operate as kind of an independent company. I think it gives them a little credibility that they're not just, the Dell lackeys, and certainly, looking at what VMware has been doing, over the last couple of years. I mean, they're really executing, it seems like, on a number of levels. So, that side of the business, it just perfectly justified in that decision. I'm really interested. I was talking to Tom Hollingsworth about this, that basically for him reading them going public again is basically, okay, private investors now are getting more cranky than, public, being a publicly traded company would be cranky at them. So now it's time for them to do basically the private investors are asking, looking for their return at some point. Sure. And it's easier it's not easier. It's better for them to be a publicly traded company. So I thought that was an interesting perspective as well. So shout out to Tom Hollingsworth.
Well, here's my crazy rich theory of the day. With bond interest rates going up and interest rates overall going up, understood there was about a $50 billion overhang of the acquisition, and that's debt that needs to be paid. And this is one way of taking care of that. And I think also a lot like a fashion show, you want to kind of prepare things behind the scenes, and then you want to walk out with the correct outfit fitting the right way on the right person. And I think that's exactly what Dell's been doing. Michael Dell's been doing all this time.
Yeah, it's still really weird to see a company go public, then private, then public again in my lifetime. But
and so quickly too.
Yeah, I mean the turnaround is a 5-year turnaround to private to public again. People have issues with Dell, whatnot. You can't argue that it seems like things are working out at least financially for them.
Yeah, although on the flip side, I had some friends who are working at Dell, and it going private was not very helpful for them. I suppose because of their entrance and their stock options or in their stock purchase plans were at such a price that the acquisition price didn't help them very much. And now they're probably kicking themselves that they weren't able to hold on. Or I don't know the details of that, but I'm sure there's also going to be a lot of upset people out there.
Well, they might not be as upset as some of the companies operating in Australia. That's because the Australian government passed a sweeping anti-encryption law, which would give law enforcement the authority to force companies operating in the country to help the government hack, implant malware, undermine encryption, and insert backdoors, with failure to do so punishable by fines. Many companies, including Apple, Mozilla, and Cisco, have asked the government to revise the sweeping language of the law. This has kind of been waiting some approval from the Labour Party in Australia, and it's finally kind of been greenlit and made into law. And I think it's important to note here, I remember when the whole Apple unlocking the iPhone with the San Bernardino bomber was that was kind of blowing up the news a couple of years ago. And
also the Alexa with the murder.
Yeah. Now you just turned on my smart speaker, Tim. Thank you very much. I'm just kidding. The issue there was Apple was saying, listen, we don't have the keys to this. It's not like we have something that can unlock this phone. We would have to build something to unlock, we'd have to devote a team of developers to cracking our own security, and we're not legally obligated to do that, basically. And one of the things in this law is basically now, if you're operating in the country and you're offering encryption, you have to have not only be willing to do that, but have a system in place already for the government to basically have a backdoor into your security. I fundamentally have a big problem with this. One, if you're doing bad things, the argument with this is that the Australian government's saying, we're not going to be doing this for copyright, issues. We're going to be doing this for child pornographers. Do you like child pornographers? No. Well, then you should support this law. It's a very classic, very serious issue, but that is used to justify these kind of laws. And, the issue is once you weaken encryption, it's just weakened for everyone. And as we've seen, there are, very persistent state-backed actors that have the means to do, and the dedication to devote huge amount of resources, to finding those backdoors. And once they're found, the cat's out of the bag at that point. And then the issue is the people that are doing those horrible things, the people that are doing child porn or terrorism or whatnot, they're gonna, encryption is math. There's no, you can't stop math. So they're going to move on to some other means of encryption that a company is not using. So they're not going to use Google Docs, or they're not going to use iMessage anymore. They're going to find some shady, weird app that has some encryption that isn't officially licensed to run in Australia. There's going to be no recourse to that. So you're only hurting the people that are following the rules. It's a classic argument for this kind of stuff, but to me, that makes the most sense.
Yeah, or folks who just VPN out of the country, probably using some form of encryption too.
Yeah.
I don't know how far this, I think you bring up a great point about how far does it go? But the other part is, what about just infrastructure level encryption? So does this mean bank records and people's own sovereignty of their existence is going to be challenged as well? So it's definitely a challenge. I do think, though, on a little more broader scale, technology has this fascinating ability of bringing to the surface what was once hidden. And so there was probably a lot of things like this going on. It wasn't called encryption. My joke is, one night stands existed long before Tinder did. Now it's more mainstream, and it's for maybe the folks who don't want to hang out in bars late at night.
Yeah, I always say the internet and technology kind of in general just puts everything at scale like overnight. And so that reveals all the cracks that, when it was at a very small scale, that tiny little crack wasn't an issue, but now it's this giant chasm. And we're still really dealing with the fact that basically any service that you can implement en masse with technology all of a sudden operates at nearly infinite scale. It's what you're seeing with, this goes back to anything like Uber. People forever have been giving gas money to people to give them rides. All of a sudden, you can infinitely book, any number of rides that you have, as long as you have the time and the means to transport them. Opens up a huge can of worms in terms of, like, are you a worker? That kind of stuff. That's a little bit, that's its own rabbit hole. But no, very interesting point there, Tim. So let's, unfortunately, I think we'll just have to see how that plays out with the Australian election coming up, I think in 4 or 5 months. So that might change the landscape of that a bit, maybe soften the bill, if not take it off the books. We will see. One thing we don't have to see about is the fate of Lotus Notes. That's because in the largest Indian IT acquisition in history, the services company HCL agreed to buy Lotus Notes, Domino, Portal, and 4 other software platforms for IBM for a cool $1.8 billion. IBM originally paid $3.5 billion for Lotus back in 1995, so it only depreciated about like $200 a second for the acquisition, which works out really well for IBM. HCL has already agreed to take over development of Notes and Domino last year, so this is not too surprising if you were following this fairly closely, although if you're following Lotus Notes news very closely, you lead a sad life, and I want to hug you. And they're looking to take on about $650 million in run rate revenue by 2020. So looks like this theoretically could pay off relatively quickly. But IBM coming off the Red Hat acquisition, spent a lot of money on that. $1.8 billion is still $1.8 billion. Helps even the books and get some legacy software out there. Surprising to see Lotus Notes still in the news, Tim. And did you ever use it? Can I ask?
Well, I got to see backstory with Lotus Notes. So it was originally written in '84 by Ray Ozzie, and I'll mention Leigh Kaywell specifically. In '89 it launched, but around 1991, Len Kaywell actually moved next door to me when I was in high school.
Oh, wow.
And clearly he didn't make a lot of money because it was quite a modest neighborhood, let's just say. And so one day he was over. So bear in mind, I'm a teenager at this point, and he was explaining, like, so Len, what do you do? And he's like, well, I wrote a program that allows people to communicate with each other, using electronic, I forgot the name he called it, maybe electronic text. And the first thing that struck in my mind was, why doesn't someone just pick up the phone? At this point, I didn't really understand the whole idea of inter-office memos and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's that's my Lotus or my Note story. But I think so I think it's really about maybe Tata or Infosys might have been also interested in acquiring, and the competition between those folks is quite fierce. In the global system integrator market. And this is something that they clearly have a business run rate with. It was probably costing IBM more to maintain than anything else, and so now all that support, all the customization will go with that, and that's really what these companies are really good with. Especially HCL.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, that was part of the reason why they wanted to hand off development to that. IBM just kind of being, wanted to gradually wash their hands with this. I'm sure the length of the reason that there's the delay between handing off the development and all out selling the company was perhaps to, not upset the apple cart too quickly, assuage users to that, this isn't going away. HCL's, you may not have maybe not have heard of them, but which is to say, like, I was doing research, like, I'm an idiot when it comes to global IT services company. HCL's this giant company, this huge reach in India and in the region. So, I'm just the ignorant American over here.
It's beyond. I mean, they're India based, but they are a global system integrator and doing very large projects for multinational corporations, as well as Tata and the other GSIs.
Tim, another global company is Microsoft, and their president, Brad Smith, asked governments recently to regulate facial recognition technology to protect personal privacy and avoid discrimination and surveillance in a speech at the Brookings Institution. Smith said that, quote, "We believe that the only way to protect against this race to the bottom is to build a floor of responsibility that supports healthy market competition." Smith said laws should require human review of facial recognition results, and if facial recognition is being used to identify a consumer, the law should make make sure that the consumer knows explicitly when and how this is happening. So basically, if you walk into, a little bit of to prevent the Minority Report situation, that you walk into a store and doesn't, flash your face, and then all of a sudden it's displaying customized ads for you or something like that. At least you'll need to know that they're going to do that before you enter the store. Weird to see giant company like this kind of coming and saying, like, please regulate us before this becomes a nightmare and we're doing, hearings like Uber and Google and Facebook are doing now in front of Congress.
Yeah.
I mean, is this Microsoft saying, like, listen, we have been on the other end where regulation is forced on us. We would rather set the table where we can help write this bill, make it still very favorable to the tech companies, but provide some consumer protections, if nothing else.
Yeah, so it's a couple things. So if you recall, Mark Zuckerberg in front of the Senate committee, one of the things they were talking about was, some kind of laws to govern how companies behave. And I think his point was, we are a large, rich company. Whatever laws you create, we're very good at working with those laws. And in fact, that will create a moat around companies to kind of keep out the disruptive, smaller, innovative companies that can't keep up. So that's kind of one side of it. And then there is the idea of choosing between social responsibility and profits. And if you're a company that has to kind of balance those two, and you don't want any more, you don't want any toxic aspects or toxic reputation, it'd be nice to only focus on profits, where we do have a level playing field when it comes to AI. And the second part of it is, as we are, my phone here is a augmented piece of my brain and my mind, and this is a private realm. Imagine in your example, I walk into a store and maybe my expression is one of guilt or remorse, and they think I'm about to steal something. Meanwhile, I might just be occupied with a business decision I had to make that I didn't feel very good about. So it's a very tricky area, and I do applaud Microsoft for whatever their intentions are for doing this.
Yeah, it seems like it's weird how pervasive the Satya mania comes. I think now, like, the narrative around Microsoft has so shifted from, the evil empire to now, like, we're this freewheeling Microsoft, we open source everything, that I think we tend to give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt now, kind of through the lens of the media narrative around Microsoft. But I kind of have to agree with you. Yeah, for whatever reason, I agree that there should be regulation on this before it gets completely out of control. And good that someone that's technically minded. I think these hearings with Facebook and with Google have shown that the people in Congress very vaguely knows how technology works, and maybe. And I'm not saying technology companies should craft the things that regulate themselves. I think it's a very bad idea. However, people that are technically minded, should say like, this is going to be an issue. Maybe start thinking about how to handle this in a regulatory capacity.
I also think it's we do come down on our legislators for not having a better understanding, but I also put the emphasis on companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft to be able to adequately explain their business models and their practices. And so that's something that maybe they need a chief analogy officer or something at the company to help people understand.
I will volunteer for that role whenever Microsoft wants to hire for that. Although I still have no idea how LinkedIn makes any money. Finally, our last story of the day, wanted to give an update on the SuperMicro investigation. There was that explosive Bloomberg report that Chinese hackers had implanted these tiny little chips and that everything was compromised from SuperMicro, and it was all doom and gloom. And it turns out that no one is willing to verify this report in any meaningful way. SuperMicro announced that an outside investigation firm found no evidence of malicious hardware in its current or older motherboards. SuperMicro told customers it commissioned the investigation after the infamous Bloomberg article reported that Chinese government had spies using the equipment to eavesdrop on clients. SuperMicro has continually denied the Bloomberg allegations. As well as Apple and basically anyone else cited, and it has definitively come out and said, no, this didn't happen. The firm tested samples of current motherboards, including versions sold to Apple and Amazon, and examined software and design files. So, this is SuperMicro going, no, here, we will spend our own money to, hire a theoretically impartial third party to look into this and basically, and see if there's any truth to this. Good on SuperMicro. Obviously, they needed to do this to, assuage any, kind of public outcry. It's kind of at a weird impasse, though. Tim, before the show we were talking. I think we're seeing all the effects of something, and we're not seeing the cause. Maybe this is, Chinese hackers have infiltrated Bloomberg and put in horrible story leads or something like that. The company certainly is taking a hit on their reputation. I know. Sure. I used to never question if Bloomberg, said sources say. I was like, okay, they've vetted this. They're crusty old publication. They have a reputation at stake here. They've obviously vetted this to a reasonable degree. I don't know what the missing piece is, but really weird that no one seems to have any idea where this report came from.
Yeah, the piece that's missing for me, and that's usually where I think we should focus our attention, is really in the supply chain. And from what I understand, there was a small chip about a size of a grain of rice that was imprinted on the fiberglass motherboard, and that was during the manufacturing process in, guess where, China. And so to me, it's really about watch your supply chain and be careful who you do business with. And so if that's Elemental Technologies, which I understand is the company that Amazon wanted to acquire, which I guess buys their chips from SuperMicro, it's something of that angle. It's important. If I'm a baker and I buy tainted flour and it makes my product make my customer sick, it's doesn't. You can test my equipment, my kitchen, my employees. It comes down to my supply chain. That's ultimately my responsibility. So
that's what makes it surprising. Apple in this report, because not only has the company kind of made security like their like their product differentiator, among other things, among quality. Apple has a bunch of things that they like to laud themselves and pat themselves on the back for, but you can't say they've made a substantive market push to differentiate themselves on privacy and security. And Tim Cook is a supply chain guy, right? He was Steve Jobs' supply chain guru that made all of this. All these unibody aluminum designs and, sourcing all these crazy components, really manageable for, at the time, a fledgling Apple that developed into this behemoth. So it was really surprising, to see a supply chain story hitting Apple. So, I do, I want to see how this shakes out. I don't want to say like just Bloomberg was flat out wrong, because it just seems so unnatural to, again, like what is a very conservative business publication, to just go after like a quick headline on a poorly sourced story. But it's also very unusual when there's SEC implications of flat out denying something and then something later comes to light for these companies. They have real financial stakes to, either say no comment or we're doing our own internal investigation, but everyone is coming out guns blazing saying, no, 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 you are completely wrong. We deny everything in the story flatly. So that's really weird. And also to very specifically say, we're not under a gag order. The government isn't telling us to tell you this. And that is very unusual to me. So we'll see how it shakes out. We love a good chip story here in the Gestalt IT Rundown. Tim, the frequent listener, of course, know this. I'm hoping Qualcomm tries to buy somebody, then we can talk about them for 3 months. But that just about does it and brings us to the end of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Tim, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for connecting over
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Where can people find more of your stuff if they want to follow you on Twitter and see perhaps some cat photos?
my 3D cat photos, those are on Facebook. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Tim Waldron.
Excellent. And you can follow me at Mr. Anthropology, MR Anthropology on Twitter. And you can also find all of my great writing at gestaltit.com. And we talked about a lot of security stories today. I mentioned at the top of the show, Security Field Day is going on, I think, starting right now. So head on over to techfieldday.com. We're live streaming all of the presentations there. We've got a ton of great companies that are going to be presenting there talking about, hey, security, kind of important today. Encryption, China. I'm going to say more scary words. So check that out, techfieldday.com, and we'll have all of those up on there on our YouTube channel really soon right after that. So if you miss any of the live stuff, check that out there as well. Tim, thanks again for doing this. Really appreciate it. And until next time we meet, have a super sparkly day.